One of the fundamental basics of filmmaking is where to put the actors and where to put the camera. So over time, cinema has developed its own language and conventions like the 180-degree rule. The rule establishes a line of action between two or more characters. The camera can move anywhere on one side of the line and the cuts will feel natural. Think of a normal conversation.
It's an imaginary shooting line used to place subjects before the camera. Here, the camera mustn't cross over the line. If it does, then the cut can't be matched up. It's reversed. I'll give you a little demonstration. Watch. See what happens? You're facing the opposite direction.
Exactly. Jumping the line will feel awkward or a little unprofessional. The rule is designed so that the audience understands spatial awareness. This person is here and they stay here. This person is here and they stay here. And it establishes screen direction. If the person on the left looks to the right and the person on the right looks to the left, we know they're looking at each other. And that can be manipulated for comedy.
This works, right?
Never better.
The 180-degree rule doesn't apply in two cases. First, if there's only one character. While you don't want to flip-flop all the time, theoretically you can do anything with a single character as long as you're not giving the audience whiplash. And second, if there's no cut. The rule exists because you're trying to establish natural spatial awareness using an artificial device like editing. People don't naturally change perspectives this quickly. But if a scene happens in one shot, it's not jarring if characters are crossing the axis over and over because it's happening in real time. Another reason why we all love long takes. Otherwise, you want to adhere to the rule.
All I got are rules.
But rules are meant to be broken, right? So before I talk about breaking tradition, I want to show why breaking it badly is so bad. First, an example from my student film, Car Keys to Romance. It's not great, but overall it's pretty competent, except one place where I cross the axis. Basically, a time traveler shows the protagonist the woman he's going to marry.
There she is.
That's her? Wow, I don't know if I can go through with this.
Yes, you can.
The protagonist is looking to the right and the time traveler is looking to the left, so you know they're looking at each other. And since the scene is about the protagonist meeting the love of his life, it's important that they have an axis too. The problem is when I cut to the love interest, I cross the axis, and now the shot implies that she's looking at the time traveler instead. It's not terrible because I established where everyone is, but it would be better if the characters actually looked at each other. But the inspiration for this video came from this scene in Broken City. Take a look.
What could I do? I was just a kid. A couple of years ago, I heard Ingersano got in some legal trouble. Kind of trouble another guy could get himself out of easily. So I got involved. Now, he scratches his ass without permission. He spends a week in Rikers.
Did you catch that? Now this scene is full of edits that are really ugly to look at. The cuts are jarring because the camera is creating a circle around the characters. The scene was probably filmed in one motion and it was butchered in editing. The problem is we innately know the path of the camera and where the characters are supposed to be. The velocity and the direction are established, but almost every time it cuts, we're moving somewhere else in the circle. It's like the camera crabs past the characters and the axis changes in real time, and then oh, we're back to where we were 2 seconds ago, only to cross over again.
And you are beautiful.
Now let's look at a great example of how to edit around a spinning camera. So the camera is constantly crossing the axis in one shot in real time, which like I said earlier is not a problem. But where does the editor Lee Smith finally cut in? Here. The edit happens when both shots are on the same side of the axis, so it doesn't feel abrupt when the perspective changes. It's also edited on a particular action, when the Joker grabs Rachel and threatens her with a knife, so even though the shot changes, it feels like one motion. And when the shot goes back to spinning, it starts on the same side before it crosses the line again. It basically keeps up this pattern every time it cuts, and it always happens on the same side, so when you're watching it, you're not really seeing the edit. It fades away. When the edit is bad, it stands out.
I say yes.
And it's probably a sign that the filmmaking overall is subpar. But in the hands of a great director, breaking the rule can be really powerful.
我要做想聽你把聲嘅。
你學得幾似我老公啦，口甜舌滑。
So why break it at all? Usually 3 reasons. To challenge conventions, a change in story, or visual variety. The stick it to the man policy was popularized by the French New Wave, a series of films that proved you could defy Hollywood conventions. In Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, he experiments with jump cuts and breaking the 180-degree rule.
Ne bouge pas ou je te brûle.
This attempt to break conservative paradigms bleeds into the Dogma 95 movement, popularized by Lars von Trier with his handheld documentary-like cinematography, and he breaks the 180-degree rule all the time.
On the contrary, grief, it's not a disease, it's a natural, healthy reaction.
You could say they're not seeing eye to eye. Filmmakers are allowed to do anything, but it doesn't mean the audience will accept it. I think intentional errors are sold by 1, using incorrect techniques to make a statement. If it's supposed to be there, then it has a purpose, so if it calls attention to itself, good.
It's like a thought, isn't it?
And 2, these films are consistently inconsistent, therefore giving the piece overall a recognizable style. If one scene is bad in an otherwise conventional film, I call that a mistake. But experimental filmmakers aren't the only ones who break rules, they're just obvious about it. How do other filmmakers break rules and get away with it? Well, like I mentioned, a lot of films cross the axis when there's a shift in story. If something jarring happens in a conversation, then a jarring cut is appropriate.
That's a nice fairy tale, but Wakanda is a third world country, and you stole all their vibranium.
I stole all of it.
Sign here, Mr. Bigby.
I didn't know you'd served in the army.
I have nae. How could I? I've been in fucking jail for 20 years, you know fucking notice.
Of course.
In a scene in Skyfall, Bond is facing the right, and behind the two-way mirror, M is facing the left. Bond participates in word association until he hears
Skyfall.
Then we cut to this shot of M, and now she's facing the right, a complete 180 flip. Later we go back to the established setup, so we subconsciously feel like something significant happened based on the visual storytelling. And this works really well in dream sequences to let you know that something's wrong.
Are you dreaming in their language?
In an attempt to try and see how can we cut this scene in the shortest and most economical way, we just bashed together some sections of it. And for example, the first cut was from Ian to Ian, a really ugly jump cut. I mean, something so overtly wrong. His head is down, his head is up, and he's talking. And it was just the accident you have when you're just throwing things together.
When's the last time you saw Monterey?
And listen to Robert Towne and David Fincher discuss Chinatown.
The revelation that he knows that John Huston has seen Mulray.
Yeah.
Jack reveals it on his back, so we get to see Huston's reaction.
Do you remember the last time you saw Mulray?
And the beauty of it is, of course, it comes off a direct reverse, which, of course, children don't try this at home. You never go from one side of a conversation to the other side where the two people change places, but in a weird way, by changing places and by occupying the space that the one occupied before, we're now seeing something that Nicholson isn't seeing. And it's the only time, actually, that we see something that he isn't seeing.
Crossing the line can be intense, like deciding to murder someone.
Blocks get put down.
Or subtle, like finally installing your operating system.
Please wait as your individualized operating system is initiated.
The easiest way to break the line is to do it in camera, which isn't technically a break, but I still think it's worth mentioning. In Requiem for a Dream, Harry makes a discovery about his mother.
Hey, Ma. You want uppers?
What?
We cross the line a few times throughout the scene, mostly when Sarah stands up or sits down, so editing on action is really important. In Fatal Attraction, the camera shifts when their polite lunch transitions into a conversation about discretion, signaling the viewer to pay attention.
Now, it's funny being a lawyer, you know, it's like being a doctor. Everybody's telling you their innermost secrets.
You have to be discreet.
Oh, God, yeah.
Are you?
In an episode of Peaky Blinders, gangster and policeman go head to head.
How can we be on the same side when I see things like this?
We establish a rhythm for a few minutes until Thomas changes the conversation.
I have what you're looking for.
And we cut to a reaction shot on the opposite side of the axis.
I have the guns. What guns?
There are a couple of shots of Thomas that are back on the other side, but he quickly stands up and the rest of the scene takes place on the opposite side. And the camera moves just to sell it. Shot design really helps jumping around. If you cut from an establishing shot to a close-up, the change in distance is more noticeable than the change in screen direction. Or you can use something called a neutral shot. Eventually, the conversation jumps back to the original side when the tension is released, and the two shots before it are almost so straight on that it switches over easily. You can see the same effect in Her, starting on one side, using a flat shot of the computer, then cutting to the other side. But neutral shots work best when you cut between two neutral shots. The Shining not only illustrates an uncanny story moment, but cutting from front to back, especially if it's the same distance, makes sense. This kind of shot design is all over the Before trilogy, where the characters mostly have conversations while they walk, and the camera tracks them front to back. And I think when characters face the same direction, the axis doesn't really exist anymore, and they kind of become one person. I've talked about the line between characters and screen direction, and usually those two ideas go together. A character on the left will probably look left to right, and no matter where the camera is, if it stays on the same side, the character will still be looking left to right. But when characters face the same direction, even if the camera stays on the same side, their screen direction is going to change, so it kind of throws out the rulebook. It's interesting that Satoshi Kon explains the 180-degree rule in the theater, because I don't think this cut is as awkward as the character describes, because they're facing the same direction. If this is about spatial awareness and flow, we know what it's like to sit in a theater, or a car, or a bar.
Well, we'd play faster if we could. Yeah, I guess it just come out like that.
To give you an example in this scene, it's very complicated and a complicated set of beats that move between the actors. If you notice, we've been shooting over their backs from behind them up to this point. We use the picture and the tilt up from the picture to suddenly climb around them and be on the other side of the counter, and now we're inside them.
I got a little girl too.
Yeah?
Her name's Carlene, yeah. She's about the same age.
At the end of the day, this is an illusion, and whatever improves the film is best. Sometimes it's better to follow the rules, sometimes it's better to break them, and a good filmmaker knows when.
I'm very strict about the axis. I'm very academic about that, and I knew where I was going to shoot it and what axis I had established on the master before. And all of a sudden I go, it's not the best side, I'm not that happy, but you know, it's invisible, it's in the movie.
And that's what filmmaking is, putting a lot of effort into devices that will go unnoticed by most people. Or if they do notice it, it better mean something.